everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I'd like to discuss risk profiles and risk budgets in BDSM. What they are, why people use them, and how to use them for yourself. In BDSM, we spend a lot of time discussing things like limits and safe words and aftercare, and all of those things are really important. But the one thing that I don't think we spend enough time discussing are the risks associated with BDSM play. If you do bring it up, it's kind of in this vague notion like be aware of the risks and don't do anything that's too risky. And for a new person especially who hasn't had a lot of experience with what BDSM is actually like, thinking critically about risk is maybe not something that you would have a lot of experience with. So what a risk profile does is it gives you a really concrete way to sit down and think about exactly what could potentially go wrong in a scene. This is not a time to be like Fear from Inside Out, where you pull out the giant book of everything that could go wrong in the first day of school. It's more of a thought exercise of the most likely things that could potentially go wrong, and just really to give yourself a more informed way of thinking about the BDSM play that you are engaging in. Particularly if you are thinking about engaging in high-risk activities like, say, bondage, where there are so many things that could potentially happen, it is really important to be aware of what some of those things are. As well, risk profiles go beyond just the physical. We usually think about risk in terms of things like, oh, I might break my nose, or I might, fracture my jaw, or I might have an asthma problem. But risk is more than just the physical. It can also be mental, it can also be emotional, it could even be moral or ethical. There's a lot of things to consider when you're evaluating whether or not a type of play is too risky for you, and we'll get more into how to identify that later. A really great way to think about how to use a risk profile is alongside a yes, no, maybe checklist. This is something that a lot of new people to BDSM use in order to evaluate what their interests are. And I do have a video about this, but a quick summary is basically a yes, no, maybe list is an A to Z chart of all sorts of different BDSM play. Everything from animal role play to chain bondage to needle play, all sorts of things. And you go through the list, sometimes by yourself or with a partner, and you basically say, yes, this is something I'm interested in. This is only something I'm interested in under these circumstances, or I'm never interested in this, and what your experience is, what your thoughts about it are, so on and so forth. But beyond just a gut feeling, how do you really know if something is what you want to do? There's something wrong with just going off of a gut feeling if you feel really passionately about something, but I would hold off a little bit there, because BDSM fantasy is not the same thing as BDSM reality. There are so many things that you can do in just fantasy that if you did in real life would be insanely risky, that I think most people would not honestly want to engage in if they were adequately informed of those risks, or things that only fantasy you really wants to engage in, but if you were to put it in a real life situation would be too intense or too stressful or would take too much time, and so on and so forth. And a lot of things can feel just in the moment like, yes, it's a super, super hot idea. That sounds amazing. That sounds like so much fun. But not to be the bearer of bad news, not to put a damper on the party, but just because something sounds really, really fun doesn't necessarily mean it's a super safe thing to do. So one thing you can do is when you are going through a yes, no, maybe list and you are looking through things and maybe some things are just straight away like no, never, whatever, okay, don't worry about doing a risk profile for them. But if you're coming across a type of play you're really interested in, I think it's worthwhile to go through that and think, okay, so here's this play I'm interested in. What could potentially happen in this type of play? And then you kind of outline it, and then you can figure out, oh, is this something I'm still interested in? Is this something that I maybe didn't really fully consider before? And maybe it's in the maybe category now. Where there's also ways that you can use risk profiles that have to do with specific scenes. And I think this is the best way to use a risk profile, because risk is very circumstantial. It depends on the location, the timing of the scene, who you're playing with, and a million other factors as well. So risk profiles are quite variable, although there are certain things that will probably be set risks for just that type of play in general, no matter how it's being conducted. But when you are using this for a specific scene, you can look at the elements you'll be using. Perhaps you're doing a hog tie bondage scene where you're wearing a gag. Okay, great. What could happen with that? Well, maybe for example, you have difficulty breathing because of the combination of the strain on your chest muscles with the gag in. Maybe you might get cramps. Maybe you might get a headache if your hair is being pulled on from the back as part of a hog tie. Maybe you get sore muscles in your neck or in your shoulders. Maybe you might have a risk of an asthma attack. If you're doing a 15-minute scene, does that alter it for you? Are you willing to take more risk with the intensity of the tie, with all of the body parts that you're going to have bound? Is that something that's changed based on the time element of the scene? Another important way to think about this is, are these risks conditional or are they inherent in the type of scene that you're doing? If you are negotiating a scene, if you're going through your risk profile and something is conditional, something can be changed, and it would normally be an unacceptable risk for you, but it can be removed as a possibility from the scene, from things like aftercare or safety precautions and so forth. Okay, great, then maybe that's still something you can participate in. But if it's something that's not conditional, if it's inherently a risk to the type of play that you're doing, such as bruising and caning, maybe you want to think twice before you engage in that type of play. If you have like a red, no, cannot do this to bruising at all anywhere in my body, and I want to do a caning scene, it's maybe not something you want to engage in, or you would need to engage in under very, very specific parameters. And a lot of this does rely very much on your own ability to understand what you are okay with and what you're not okay with, and how you can change things in a scene, and how willing you are to accept certain risks, or how likely something is to happen. An additional tool that you can use alongside evaluating a risk profile is a risk budget. I think this is particularly helpful for new people who are negotiating doing new types of play. And basically what a risk budget does is it gives you a way of thinking about like the total number of acceptable risks that you are willing to take in a scene. A risk budget is not necessarily a set thing. Maybe you have a very low risk budget. Maybe you have a really high risk budget. Maybe it depends on the person you're playing with. If you are super, super analytical and you've gone through and you've given points to all of the things that are the most likely to happen, and additional points if there's something that is very unacceptable to you, you can use like hard numbers to calculate a risk budget for yourself. Like, let's say you have a risk budget of 30 points for a scene, and you are going to be doing a caning scene, and the likelihood of bruising for the type of caning you're going to be doing is an 8, and it's a red, it's an unacceptable risk, and that adds like an extra 10 points to it. Well, shoot, that's over half of your risk budget totally blown on just the caning element of the scene. What other risks are potentially in the scene? Are you going to be using a gag? Is this going to be in public? Are you going to be restrained? Do you have enough room to be comfortable pursuing this scene, given the likelihood of basically the most likely worst case things that you would want to typically avoid or mitigate for? Again, it doesn't have to be hard and fast numbers. It can be more intuition based. You can kind of go like, I don't want to be too risky with this type of scene. I want to play conservatively, and these type of higher, more likely risks are something I don't feel comfortable with. Or you might feel like, well, we've been doing a lot of really great scenes together. I feel comfortable exploring kind of more murky waters with this person, so maybe I'm more likely to accept risks that with another play partner or in another situation I may not have felt comfortable doing. It's basically a way of thinking about the maximum amount of risk that you are comfortable accepting for a scene in order to give informed consent. And if something goes beyond your risk budget, if it goes beyond what you have established for yourself as the maximum amount of risk you would want to accept, maybe you walk back the type of play that you're doing. But at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be that analytical. You don't have to go through all of this with like a pencil and putting numbers and color coding everything and like writing out a budget and like, doing all these different things. It doesn't need to be that way. I think the purpose of having that kind of methodology is more a temporary way of learning how to engage in a certain mindset when it comes to evaluating whether or not a scene is something you want to do. If you are new and you take this and you practice it and you go through certain types of play, certain specific scenes, and you practice writing out the risk for that type of play and evaluating whether or not that is going to go over your budget or not, you will learn a way of thinking about play that is about giving informed consent to the type of play that you're doing. You are being informed of the risks. And once you have learned that behavior to be analytical with the type of play that you're doing, even when you're not putting hard numbers to it, that is a really important skill. And at the end of the day, I think that is what the best thing about risk profile establishment is you learn more about what could potentially happen in a scene, so that way you are doing your due diligence as a submissive or as a dominant when you are engaging in BDSM activities. Anyways, hopefully this made sense. I kind of worry that maybe some of this might go over people's heads a little bit. So if you have questions, let me know. I am happy to follow up with more information and additional explanations. If you have any other comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section as well. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And if you really like this video and you want to support this channel, the best way you can do that is over on Patreon. That gives you access to lots of exclusive perks and rewards, chats, extra videos, photo shoots, all kinds of fun things. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. Link will be down in the description box. And if you already support my channel, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.